They said that it would all happen in God's time. What does that even mean? I've been waiting for a new job opportunity for like 10 months, and I can't wait any longer. I've been applying everywhere. What is God's time?
We need to going to propose. If I hear one more time that if it's meant to be, it will happen in God's time, I'm going to freak out. We've been together for 4 years. I'm ready to start our life together.
Nothing seems to be going right. Everything seems to end up nothing like how I planned it. It's all in God's timing. It's basically a nice way of saying, yeah, it's never going to happen.
You ever been mountain climbing before? No, that makes two of us. I've watched it on TV, though, and that's got to count for something, right? I had a chance to go rock climbing on a wall. How about anybody ever done that? One person. Okay, good. But, at least as I was doing that, I could pretend I was climbing a mountain. Now, if you've never done that before, usually when you go, you wait in line for your turn, and they'll give you a little speech on safety things, do this, don't do that. And then they'll give you some kind of harness like this to put on to keep you safe. And then it would be your turn. So once you figure out how to put that on, which leg and arm goes where, they hook you to this carabiner, this hook, this clipped hook, and that's connected to a rope that goes all the way up to the top of where you're going to climb to on a pulley, and then there's someone at the bottom that holds the rope. And I'll never forget the first time that I tried that. I got all the harness stuff on. I listened to what I was supposed to do, and I got started. There was no looking back. One handhold after another. I was just climbing like crazy going up there, and this was so easy. I thought, what's the problem? Why does everybody think this is so hard? And you get to the top, and there's a platform usually that you climb up to, and sometimes there's a bell or some kind of device that you can let everybody know, look at me. Look what I did. Look what I accomplished. And so I climbed up the mountain, my mountain. And I got to the top, stood on the platform, and I rang the bell really loud, and I looked out over the horizon just to see everybody looking to see what I accomplished, right? And just at that moment, did you ever hear about a cat that runs up a tree? Gets stuck, right? Because it doesn't know what to do next. That was me. So I'm up there looking around, and I'm like, okay, now how do I get down? I've got this confused look probably on my face. And there was an attendant at the top who saw my concern and said, it's easy to get down. This is all you have to do, is you back up to the edge, you hold on to your rope, and you lean back, and you start walking down the mountain. I said, oh, well, that's it, right? That's all I have to do. Why didn't I know that? And as I leaned back, something occurred to me. 1,000 thoughts kind of ran through my mind all at once. How strong is this rope? How secure am I in this harness that they put on me? Is the person at the bottom going to be able to hold me? How much damage am I going to do when all this goes south and I end up on the floor? I had this overwhelming feeling of helplessness. I was completely out of control. There was nothing I could do other than to trust what I had on and the person that told me, just lean back and walk down. I was at the mercy of things beyond my control. Now, it doesn't just come from rock climbing, but life can be like that sometimes. We can run into situations where we feel helpless and out of control. Have you ever been in a situation like that? Where something was completely beyond your means, there was nothing you could do about it, and you were at the mercy of whatever was going on. So how did you get through it? What did you do? This week, we're wrapping up our series, I Am, and it's been a little intentionally different. We've had skits up here that we've seen. We've sang more songs than normal. We've even sang some songs that we haven't heard before. And there was a reason for that. And I hope that as we go through this series, as you've been here for the other weeks that we've talked about different things, that it's had an impact on you, that you've been able to maybe take something away from it. As we've talked about, Jesus brought this new and profound message to the people. He explained to them and to us why he was there, what he came for, what his purpose was. And we heard him say things like he was the bread of life, implying that Jesus provides all the things that we need. He was also the light of the world, a beacon of hope for those who are in darkness. Jesus talked about being our good shepherd, the one who would protect us, who would care for us in our time of need. Jesus also said that he was the way, the truth, and the life. That through him, and only through him, was it possible for us to have a connection with God, to have a relationship with him. And as we talked about, that's a very contentious statement, especially in our day and age when a lot of people question Jesus' authority. They question whether he has this authority over their lives. So each Sunday we looked at a different facet of who Jesus was and what he came to do. Well, this morning we're ending with a claim that he made that many people say is the most profound, powerful statement that he ever made. And it was a miracle that he was getting ready to perform, as we heard a portion of in the reading. It's also something that set in motion as we move into Lent here on Wednesday, that we see led Jesus to being arrested and being executed. So there's a lot of significance in the words and the things that he did that we'll hear about today. So let's start with a little bit of background to kind of set the stage so we can understand what was going on. Jesus and his disciples were about a day's walk from Bethany. And that's where Mary and Martha and Lazarus lived. It's a city that's not too far from Jerusalem. And while they were there, Jesus received news that his dear friend Lazarus was sick and that Jesus was urgently needed. Now, Lazarus was the brother of Mary and Joseph. And you might remember hearing a story of Mary and Joseph, a time when Jesus came to visit them. And Mary sat at Jesus' feet and she listened to everything he said, while Martha was busy working in the kitchen and getting all the stuff prepared and done that needed to be finished. You can kind of, if you've ever had a brother or sister, anybody ever had a sibling, maybe still have a sibling and you haven't done anything to them, you can picture kind of how this would have gone, right? All of this work needs to be done, and Martha is slaving away at it while Mary's just sitting there. And you can put this in your own voice of your sibling if you want, but she probably asks questions like, how come she doesn't have to help? Jesus, say something to her. Tell her, why am I doing all the work? Anyway, the sisters sent this message to Jesus. But before he gets up and gathers his disciples with him to leave, he waits 2 days. 2 days, understanding the urgency of the request, he waited 2 more days. Now, they didn't have email or Snapchat back then. It hadn't been invented, in case you were wondering. But by the time Jesus gets this message, we know that Lazarus is very ill. In fact, some believe that by the time Jesus heard of what was going on, Lazarus had already passed away. So, like I said, Bethany is very close to Jerusalem, and it was only a short time before that Jesus was in this area with his disciples, and the Jewish leaders tried to kill him. So going back to Bethany, this nearness to Jerusalem, was very dangerous, very risky for all of them. But with Jesus, everything happened for a reason, and as we'll see, this is exactly how he wanted it, what he wanted to occur. This incident was no different than any of the others. So John tells us that by the time Jesus and his disciples arrived, Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. And that's significant for our story. During Jesus' ministry, there's a record in the Gospels of 3 times that Jesus performed a resurrection. It wasn't his resurrection, but of people that had passed. First one was a widow's son, her only son, and Jesus walked into the town of Nain, and he came to a procession, a funeral procession. And he stopped them in the middle, and he raised the woman's son to life. Luke tells us that when the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." Then he went up and touched the coffin, and those carrying it stood still. He said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began to walk and talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. The second time, Jesus was approached by a man, a Jewish man named Jairus. His daughter was sick, and the man asked Jesus to come to his house and to heal her, to do whatever needed to be done. Well, before Jesus could get there, the little girl had died. Jesus went into the house and he called her back to life. He said, "Talitha kum," and the girl opened her eyes, and she stood up. In both cases, it was clearly a miracle. There shouldn't have been any other way to explain it. But the effect only had a temporary effect on the people. The spectators remembered this for only a short time. People followed him, but maybe perhaps when the novelty wore off, they went their own ways. One of my first classes in seminary was an overview of the New Testament. And so I asked the professor about these events. We were talking about the resurrection. I said, why do you think it wasn't enough for the people to believe? I mean, sure, some of the things maybe, possibly, they could have been explained away. You know, maybe the whole water and wine thing was a sleight of hand. Maybe the fish, the great catch that the disciples had, was a coincidence. Maybe when the weather changed and they were in the boat and they were fearful for their lives, maybe it just happened to change. But resurrection? Coming back to life? Brought back from the dead? You don't see that happen. And so I'm asking him this question, and he smiled and looked around the room and he said, any other questions? But if you think about it, that is the question, isn't it? What would it take to have true faith? What do we need to see? What would God need to do for us to wholeheartedly believe in His Word, to surrender our lives to Him? Would it take Him coming to earth? Would it take Him performing maybe some miracles? Dying on the cross? Rising from the dead? What would be enough? By the time Jesus arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. Well beyond any reasonable doubt, no one questioned what had happened to him. So when Jesus told the people to roll away the stone, their response, and I like the King James Version the best, but they said this, Lord, by this time he stinketh. They were worried about this guy, that he had been in the grave for so long. And when Martha heard that Jesus was coming and he was getting close to their city, she ran out to meet him. And I wonder, how do you think we should interpret or understand her greeting? Listen to the words. She said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. How else could we say that? How else could we understand that? Could she have been sad? Lord, if you would have been here, with tears in her eyes, my brother, he wouldn't have died. Maybe she was angry. Jesus, if you hadn't been here, if you'd have got here on time when I told you to, my brother would still be alive. Maybe she was upset over his failure to see the urgency of her request. Maybe it was just a statement of fact. Jesus, if you'd have been here, this wouldn't have happened. I know it. I know it beyond a shadow of a doubt. Can you appreciate the difference? Can you see the different ways that we could take that? But what's striking is what happens next. What she says to him. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. And it's striking because regardless of what was going on, regardless of the situation, what was going on in their hearts and the loss and the terrible feelings they had, Martha knew and believed that with God anything was possible. So do you think if you were in her position, you could look at things that way? Could you see life and death from that perspective? There's an old idiom that you've probably heard before that says, seeing is believing. But I don't know if I can see my way into believing that. And if Hannah was up here, she could do the drums, right? Dun dun dun. I can't understand it completely anyway. And because when it comes to faith, I think there's more to it than that. There's two parts that we need to have faith. It's the knowing and the believing. Let me give you a few examples to see if we can get where I'm going here. How many of you came in some type of automobile? Car, truck? I would say motorcycle, but it's a little cold for that. Okay. Now, when you got in your mode of transportation, did you believe it would get you here? Maybe with a few prayers, but you knew you'd get here, right? But did we really know that we would? We hoped, we trusted, we prayed, but we didn't give it a second thought. We got in the car. We didn't know for certain. Something could happen. How many of you, when you came in today, sat down in your chair without checking to see if the screws were in it? You're all going to be paranoid now the next time you get here, right? All right, here's one more. Have you ever been on a roller coaster before? Okay? As the car pulled into the station and you got into the seat to sit down, did you ever wonder, is this ride safe? Did you consider if the harness was secured properly? Did you check the nuts and bolts to make sure they were tight? How about the track? Was it in good shape? What if the ride loses power? How about that mysterious operator that's at the end that says, please keep your hands and arms inside the vehicle at all times? Were they properly trained in their job? We don't know, do we? Now, I'm not trying to freak you out and keep you from going to Cedar Point ever again. But we do, on these things, we don't know any of them, do we? We just believe them to be true. Honestly, we can believe a lot of things, right? Maybe without even realizing it. Now, what about knowing? Can we know without believing? Sure, we can know facts, yet we can still struggle with belief. During World War II, there was a Jewish man by the name of Jan Karski. He'd spent time in the ghettos, and he'd also been imprisoned in the concentration camps. Because of his experiences, he witnessed firsthand the atrocities, the terrible things that were taking place, the suffering and the cruelty that came at the hands of the Nazi regime. And when a member of the underground resistance was able to free him, he said, what should I do? What can I do now that you have gotten me out of here? And they said, you need to speak with the Jewish leaders. You need to tell people what's going on so that the world will know. You see, up to that point, there had only been whispers and rumors, and not everyone could believe the things that were happening. They were too atrocious, too mind-boggling. They told Karski, whatever you do, don't let a single leader at the United Nations be able to say that they didn't know what was going on, that people were being murdered in Poland. So according to reports, on November of 1942, he went to the United Nations, and in a plea, he said to them everything that he had experienced. He told them, he laid down the evidence. He talked to the top members of the Allied forces. Again, in July 28th of 1943, he had a very long meeting with President Roosevelt, explaining to him everything that he had experienced and what was going on behind enemy lines. Yet to Karski's surprise, no one acted, not one. Because no one could believe the stories. They were of such a magnitude that how could these events possibly be true? Yet the facts were irrefutable. They knew, and yet they couldn't bring themselves to believe. Does that sound familiar? Can we see that happening today? How many people have heard about Jesus, and yet they say those stories, those facts are just too much of a magnitude for me to understand. They're too great. I can't grasp that. You ever find yourself sitting on that fence? So faith is twofold: knowledge and belief. In our reading today, Martha had both of those things. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will live, even though they die, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. And after saying that, he asked her one simple question: do you believe? Perhaps a better translation of the word he used was, do you have faith? Do you trust me, Martha? Are you living in me? Now, Martha could have certainly had her doubts. Why wasn't Jesus there to save her brother? Why did he let her heart get broken? She could have been angry. I think we probably wouldn't have blamed her for that. After all, why did Jesus allow Lazarus to get sick in the first place? He could have stopped all this. She could have stormed out of her house and ran up to him to give him a piece of her mind, and I kind of half believe that Jesus was prepared for that. Yet in the most striking confession of the New Testament, she said, yes, Lord, I believe. I believe that you are the Christ. I believe that you are the Son of God who is to come into the world. And you see, it's that belief that faith, that knowledge of the Savior that leads to eternal life. That's what she knew, and that's what Jesus was sharing with her. It's a faith that says, you're God, and I'm not. And in spite of my questions, my anger, my frustrations, my feelings of helplessness, my pain and disappointments, Lord, I still believe. I still trust in your goodness and your mercy. That's the kind of faith that Martha had. And that's the kind of faith that we can have as well. That's what we can believe.
I know it's been a while, but I just have to keep praying and that God will answer my prayers about me getting this job. It may not have been in the way that I expected everything, but everything happens in His time, not ours. For now, I just have to keep praying and keep applying to new jobs, and maybe eventually it'll just fall into my lap. Oh, hey, look, I got an email. It's an acceptance letter for the job that I applied for last week.
Heavenly Father, if I'm supposed to marry this man, please lead me on the path that you have designed, not the path that impatience and wants created. Oh, it's a text. It says that he has a special night planned and that I should dress up. Maybe it's actually going to happen.
I heard it again today. It's all in God's time. And I think I finally understand what that means. I need to be patient that God has a plan. It isn't my plan, and it may not align at all, but the plan is for the greater good.